Yeah, like, it seems like we talked last Friday, right? So during that time while we were talking, so Trump, um, that was like a day after Trump announced this huge, massive tariff war, I guess, against the whole world. And around that time, I think China reacted. Okay, China, I would say, announced their countermeasure. So not only they put in retaliatory tariffs of 34% of all U.S. goods, but it's also filed a lawsuit against the United States in the WTO. It listed a number of U.S. entities or companies on the export control list, or some kind of a unreliable entity list, they call it, and then implemented export controls on heavy rare earth related items, and also suspended import of poultry products of several U.S. companies. So, um, don't you think Trump was not prepared for this?
He was completely not prepared for this. He was expecting that when he imposed the first sanctions, that Xi Jinping would phone him. I mean, he's pretty much admitted. If you look at his true social messages, you can see there that Xi Jinping would phone him up and say, "Please, please, Donald, come to some kind of agreement with me. You know, I'm going to capitulate. I understand that I've done bad things. Now, you know, let's do a deal, because if we don't do a deal, my great economy, China's economy, will crumble and disintegrate and fall apart." That was what Trump expected. And he is baffled and very, very angry that it hasn't happened that way. And he's now maneuvered himself into a situation where he is drifting into an economic war with China, because that's what it amounts to. Now, I have always said this. I mean, I've said this repeatedly to person after person I've met. And, you know, I speak not as somebody who holds himself out as any great China expert. In fact, I've become very skeptical about people
Mhm.
in the West who call themselves China experts. Let me just say this. But just the pattern of Chinese policy since, I think you call it liberation in China, 1949.
Mhm.
Never the first rule of foreign policy, never bluff China,
Mhm.
because your bluff is always
Cool.
called. You must have heard me say this.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what Trump now finds himself in. So the Chinese did all of those things. They slapped their own retaliatory tariffs. They went to the WTO. Now, that is going to be very interesting, because bear in mind, all the talk, all the rhetoric we've been hearing for all the last 10 years about the rules based
Hmm.
international order
Hmm.
that originates, believe it or not, from the WTO. I mean, it started with the rules the WTO was setting for trade, and then some clever people, Blinken, Blair before,
Hmm.
said, you know, we should have identical rules set
Hmm.
by us for everything, and that was supposed to be the rules-based international order. Well, we see that even at its origin point now, the trade rules, the United States is actually violating them.
Yeah.
It's in fact not only violating them, it's paying no attention to them. It's
Yeah.
just steaming forward and imposing these sanctions. So anyway, he's been bluffed. His bluff rather has been called.
Hmm.
He's also discovering that he's got this whole thing absolutely wrong. He's quarreling with Elon Musk, who
Hmm.
was
Yeah.
his most
Hmm.
important political ally.
Hmm.
Um, that is dangerous for Trump, because Musk, of course, is a powerful man in himself, but he speaks for the whole tech brotherhood.
Hmm.
This I have absolutely known, who are shocked by what has happened. And it does not understand the Chinese economy or Chinese society, and he doesn't understand properly his own society and economy either. He assumes that America is much more powerful relative to China than it really is, and he completely misunderstands that the determination of the Chinese, and I don't just mean the Chinese government, but of Chinese society altogether, not to be put in a position again
Hmm.
where China makes concessions, agrees to unequal arrangements,
Yeah.
unequal treaties, if you like, all over again. China will not be pushed around it that way. Again, thinking that it will, completely fails to understand the history of modern China, of which I must say Westerners are completely ignorant and have a very distorted understanding of.
Yeah, he clearly, it seems to me, like you said, what he posted on Truth Social, it clearly shows he's almost like in a panic mode because
Yeah.
first he said he's going to put a, you know, 50% of the tariffs because China retaliated. And so, and he said effective April 9th, which is, I think is today, right? And so, additional, he said, all talks with China concerning the requested meetings with us will be terminated. So, okay, no meetings. But less than like 24 hours, he posted another thing talking about the South Korean president or something. And there, of course, China is in his mind. Like you said, they're
Of
always
course it
obsessed
is.
with China. So in that post, all of a sudden he said, China also wants to make a deal badly, but they
Yeah.
don't know how to get it started. We're waiting for their call. So from 1 minute, okay, no more phone calls, no more meetings, to the next, oh, we're waiting for their call. So he seems like it doesn't know how to handle this, right? So what do you think?
Well, because he's been listening to people like Gordon Chang and the people at Epoch Times, and he believes that that's the reality of China. I'm not exaggerating here. I really do think this. I mean, Epoch Times, as you probably know, has been fervently, fanatically supportive of Donald Trump.
Mhm.
So he always goes to those people who support him. And he thinks that because they support him, what they're telling him about China is real. But you're absolutely right. I mean, in a game of poker, he's the person who's shown weakness first. People got this whole Truth Social post about South Korea, by the way, completely wrong. It's not about South Korea at all. The new acting president of South Korea has only been there for a few hours. I mean, he's hardly in a position to negotiate about anything. And
Mhm.
all that the South Koreans are able to do is send a delegation to the United States, and no doubt they will be there. But the real purpose of that post, what Trump was trying to do, was to conceal his plea to Xi Jinping. Please, please call me. You see, it's squirreled there at the bottom, behind a whole lot of fluff and bombast about South Korea. But it is China that is at the center and core of this thing. He's got, as I say, he's got China completely wrong. He doesn't understand. He doesn't understand China, Chinese society, the Chinese economy, the pride that people in China have
Mhm.
about the way in which China has rebuilt itself, its determination. I was reading an extraordinarily powerful editorial in Global Times, which spoke about how China has feels that it has right on its side, which it does, by the way. I mean,
Mhm.
legal right, moral right. Um, I mean, all this Western talk about China, predatory capitalism, and all of that. Given the history, given what's happened to China, what the Western powers did to China, going all the way back to, was it 1830 or whatever it
Yeah,
was? It's
yeah.
talking that kind of way to Chinese people. It's not going to win you many friends
Yeah.
in China if you talk like that. So I mean, he says he's completely misjudged this whole thing. Now, somehow, in some way, he is going to have to find an off ramp. How he's going to do it, I don't know. I
Mhm.
don't even know, though, personally, what exactly it is he thinks he's going to achieve here. I mean, what the ultimate objective behind all of this is. I mean, to protect domestic US industries,
Mhm.
to please auto workers, to protect them from EV cars, Chinese EV cars. We've discussed this
Mhm.
many, many times. All kinds of things could have been done to sort that out and to work with China to find ways forward. He could have done all of that. He could still do all of that, but he has to somehow get past this absurdity that he's landed himself with and put the Gordon Changs and those idiots, and I'm sorry to call them idiots because that's what they are, to
Yeah.
put them finally to one side.
Well, it's interesting that you're talking about you don't know what he's trying to achieve. That's my question is because so for example, Navarro had an interview, Peter Navarro, the advisor, one of those idiots, I think. Anyway, he he
Well,
was
I mean, Elon Musk just called him a moron, by the way. I
yes,
mean, just
yes,
saying. I mean, so,
yes. So he was on I think Fox or one of the interviews. So he was talking about he used Vietnam as example. He said every dollar that we sell to Vietnam, Vietnam sell us $15. Okay, so that's the trade imbalance that he absolutely hate. And then he said five of which are they're just repackaging Chinese goods and could send them. Okay, so let's minus that that five, and then you minus the one that U.S. Equal. There is still $9 left that Vietnam runs a surplus. So what should Vietnam do? Just not sell that $9 to you or divide that into two with you or something. He laid out this and saying that is so unfair, and he also accused Vietnam as dumping steel and shrimp, what have you. So all kinds of, in his view, very unfair trading practices. But exactly what he want, for example, in this case, Vietnam to do, it's not clear to me what Vietnam should do to satisfy them, right? I
it's it's not clear to anybody. I mean, there's nothing, as far as I can see, that Vietnam can do to satisfy them. Again, by the way, I mean, talking to Vietnam about Vietnam practicing unfair practices on the United States, completely forgetting about the history, the not very recent history, and
Mhm.
people, think about the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
But America imposed very, very severe economic restrictions, practically an economic blockade on Vietnam for about 20 years after the
Mhm.
end of the Vietnam War. Just saying. Um, I I mean, it is grotesquely unfair, and it also shows a deep disrespect for the hard work of people in Vietnam who've
Mhm.
been working very, very hard to try to rebuild their country. By the way, there has been apparently, I mean, I was speaking to some people from Vietnam. There has been a section of the Vietnamese media which has been aligned with the United States and has been running campaigns against China. It's
Mhm.
not apparently got very much traction within Vietnamese society, but it is there. Well, those people must feel like complete fools now. just saying. I mean, from their point of view. But uh, what is Vietnam supposed to do? Remain poor indefinitely? Refuse to participate in the trading system? I mean, if they make Nike trainers, which apparently they do, and they
Mhm.
make them well at cheap prices, are they supposed to stop making Nike trainers? Are they supposed to buy expensive Nike trainers
Yeah.
in return from the United States? Who in Vietnam can afford them? I mean, it's a poor country. Are they supposed to stop making steel? I
Yeah.
mean, it's shows a complete failure again to understand world trade and the world trading system, which, and this is the key thing, the United States itself created. I mean, this whole trading system with the dollar as the reserve currency, with the United States exporting dollars and importing manufactured goods from around the world, was a system that the United States created itself
Mhm.
30, 40, 50 years ago in order to maintain its geopolitical position. Suddenly it discovers that, some people in America, a lot of people in America, many people in America are losers from this system. Do they do the necessary reforms in the United States to change that? Do they, for example, cut back on their absolutely out of control arms spending? Do they make serious efforts to bring their permanent budget deficits out of control? We had a really good program yesterday with Jeffrey Sachs, by the way, in
Okay.
which he points out that the fundamental reason why the United States runs trade deficits is because it overspends.
Mhm.
So it is spending more on than its capacity can fulfill. So inevitably, it has to import goods from overseas. So the United States could get its own financial house in order. No, it won't do any of those things. It blames everyone else. I mean, that's what it does. And when we say it blames everyone else, it blames the Asians most of all because they're hardworking, they're educated, they're disciplined. They have the effrontery to challenge the United States at the high technology level as well, in the case of China. And that violates the established order of things, the natural order of things. And so they must be to blame for the fact that our great economy is no longer, the first in the world. It's really, I mean, it's both wicked and sad.
Now, Trump prided himself for being the person who can do trade, who can do deals, right? The art of deals, and he prided himself. But do deals, so isn't there a basic thing is that you need to know what cards you have, right? You need to know what cards your opponent has, okay? At least have some good guessing. Okay, you don't know exactly, but you should have. In this case, for example, I even didn't know until I see all the discussions in the Chinese netizens amongst the Chinese netizens. Apparently, one thing the Chinese government is also laid it out is that you escalate this 50% because Trump now is saying add another 50%. You do that, we have more countermeasures. Among others, they're going to look into the service sector. I didn't even know that of course, service sector is a huge sector for the United States, and that's where the United States actually run a surplus, the service sector. And that's including, of course, consulting, accounting, legal, insurance, education, design of all kinds and software services and medical, entertainment, all that kind of thing. And that's where is really right now is running surplus for the United States. And then when you say, trade imbalance, that's also imbalance for China and then many other countries. So China could put on tariffs on those services as well. I don't think Trump thought about that. I don't think Trump
No, because
calculate that at all. It's very important. That part is very important.
he hasn't calculated that because again he's listening to. I mean, I don't know about specifically. I'm sure he has, by the way, listened to Gordon Chan. But I mean, he doesn't realize that China is able to do all of these things too. I mean, he still has this idea of China as some kind of workshop that takes things from the United States, packages, screws them all together, and then re-exports them and does all the things that Americans. I mean, we did a live stream yesterday on the Duran. And again, we had, the ardent American patriots trotting this all out to us all over again. And I'm pretty sure that this is still what he believes. He doesn't understand that China can do maritime insurance, banking, legal services, all of those things.
Yeah.
It's something, as I said, that Westerners simply cannot bring themselves to acknowledge. I encountered this. When they imposed the oil cap on Russian oil and said that ships that were going around the world with Russian oil above the cap would not get maritime insurance. And I used to work in this area, by the way, because I understand. Now, I said once upon a time in the 1960s and 1970s, which I remember because, I was there at that time, even though I was a child. In those days, all ships everywhere, except a very few ships, which, the China of that period, Mao's China, for example, ran. But even some of those, all ships around the world were insured in London because only London had that level of expertise. Today, it is completely different. China has those resources, those skills to insure ships. Russia does. India does. Indonesia does. The idea that China cannot provide its own services, it cannot develop its own services sector is ridiculous. We are talking about the world's biggest trading power in goods. And of course, a country that trades goods on that scale Of course, a country that has the world's greatest maritime presence. And by the way, I should say all services, all the big complex services originate from trade, from maritime trade. Again, I worked in this sector, so I know. So insurance, what we know of today as insurance, began as maritime insurance. Commercial law began, it was an outgrowth of shipping law. I mean, I've studied it, I've worked in it, I know exactly what I'm talking about. The idea that a country, as I said, that is so heavily involved in all of these things cannot reproduce the skills that, London and New York, and by the way, Stockholm has, is ridiculous. A country that can make AI programs and send up rockets and produce advanced chips and can sort out production lines and knows how to do supply chains, that they can't do services, is ridiculous. The only reason they've been sticking with Western services up to now is because they've been efficient and it's part of the division of labor. But if you start creating tariffs, that's exactly what's going to happen. And if it happens, it's not coming back. Shanghai will become the center of this. Shanghai and Guangdong and Tianjin and all of these places, absolutely they can do it.
Yeah, and I was just thinking like accounting firms, the big four, they have been pretty active in China simply because when China first opened up, they came, they have the expertise and they have the reputation and all that sort of thing. And they have been living on that, for all these years.
Yeah.
But now if Trump continued this route, if China started putting tariff on them, there are companies within China could do what they're doing, right? So it's just that they had better name recognition in the past. But it's almost like forcing China to replace these companies. And it's truly stunning that Trump doesn't think of these terms, that these are the American strengths, right? These are Americans, stars, companies that run surplus that he likes. But
Absolutely. Again,
but
I'm
he's
going to say
hurting
something
them.
about accountancy because again, this is a world which I'm reasonably familiar with. I mean, I've been somewhat more out of date here, but I suspect what I'm going to say is true. I mean, my own impression of the big four accountancy firms is that actually they're not very good.
Yeah.
I mean, they've become very, very, very big, and scale obviously matters because you can
Yeah.
establish a presence in all sorts of places, but they become extremely nervous about upsetting their big
Yeah.
customers, and you really aren't. I think, have you done some work in this area too? I think.
Yeah.
Sophie.
Well,
Anyway, I'm not.
yeah.
But I mean, they're not. I mean, if you're talking about good accountancy firms in London, I know firms in London that provide much better accountancy services than the big international ones. Again, the idea that China cannot do accountancy is just stupid. I mean, it is fundamentally stupid, and it shows a basic ignorance of your adversary. If you want to treat him as your adversary, why should you? But anyway, that's where we are.
Yeah, and just to share with you, so on the White House website, they actually posted something interesting. This guy, Stephen Miran, he's the chairman of the economic CEA, I think is a Council for Economic Advisor. So he gave a speech in one of the Hudson Institute, one of the think tanks. And he basically are answering this question. So he calls it to share the burden. So he's saying all the burden has been bared by United States alone, to help everybody and then hurt itself. So now it's time to share the burden. So how to share the burden, which essentially is saying how you can, get US to forgive you or something. So here are the 5 things he said. Basically, if I can summarize it, is basically when there is a tariffs on you, you should not retaliate. So no retaliation. And buying more American products, and then boost your defense spending, install factories in the United States. And the last one is the best one. Simply write checks to Treasury that help us finance our global public goods. So write checks to the United States Treasury.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the 5 things.
Yeah. I mean, declare yourself a colony and be happy about it. I mean, that's basically what it amounts to.
Yeah. So,
I mean, again, it's ridiculous. And what makes it so unpleasant, actually, I mean, it would be funny if it were not, as I said, the consequences, the economic consequences were not so bad. But what makes it particularly ugly is this sense of America the victim. I mean, it's you know that you know we're the you know we've been cheated by all of these people around the world. I mean, you're kidding me. Do you have any idea of the impact the United States has had on places around the world, on what's happened around the world? As I said, the Americans still cling on to this belief that, you know, that some other good, virtuous people, and if things go wrong, it's always because somebody bad from outside has come and done something bad to them. The British have the same complex, by the way, I should say. I mean, you know, the British Empire was this great philanthropic institution that did good pretty much everywhere, and Britain itself is this wonderful parliamentary democracy and all that. And it's really sinister outsiders who don't understand what good people we really are. Just saying.
Well, but like you said, there's factions within the Trump circle, right? So clearly Elon Musk is not impressed. And like you said, he calls Navarro truly a moron. But why is that the Navarro faction right now clearly has the upper hand? Is it because Trump himself believes in tariffs? Is that the reason?
Yes. Yes, he
Okay.
does. I mean, he's been writing about tariffs since the 80s. I mean, he even published, I think it was in 87, some big ad in, I think it was the New York Times, calling for tariffs. I mean, he's one of those people who gets an idea and won't drop it. I mean, he's absolutely focused and obsessed with this idea of tariffs. And I think he's always had that inclination. He also goes to these communities, these communities across the United States. He meets the workers there. He's very sorry for them. I think that is true, actually. I think at some level he really does care for people there. He sees their ways in which their societies, their communities have been destroyed. But of course, he like many people, he won't accept that it is because of the structure of the American economy itself. He believes because he can't really ever criticize or internally criticize the United States. It has to be outsiders.
One of the things, no, there are pushbacks even within his own party because there are floating. I mean, in the Congress, there are people who are proposing some kind of a law to limit his power to introduce more tariffs, and there are 7 Republican senators that are joining them now. But my question to you is this: in the past, there were tariffs, but they also seems like always go through the Congress. The McKinley had this Dingley Tariff Act, and Hoover had the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, right? So in both cases, they went through the Congress. Now Trump bypassed the Congress. He just used executive order. There are people even considering filing lawsuit saying he really shouldn't have this power. So could this be some kind of a legal problems for him to do this?
Well,
Bypass the
as far as
Congress?
I mean, all of these senators and Congress people who are complaining that, you know, they need to pass a law to restrain Trump. They don't need a law to restrain Trump. The Constitution clearly says that the power to raise taxes and impose tariffs rests with Congress. It's there. It's actually in the Constitution itself. What Trump has done is completely unconstitutional. Now he's done it. He's come up with this ever complicated, bizarre argument that there's some kind of economic emergency, and that these aren't real tariffs as such. These are reciprocal tariffs to
Mm-hmm.
hit back at the bad trading practices that other countries have, which is nonsense, by the way. I mean, it's absolutely ludicrous. But what Congress could quite reasonably do, it seems to me, is actually pass resolutions saying that this is illegal, that it violates the Constitution, make a referral of this to the Supreme Court of the United States, say that even if the president really believed that there was a state of emergency and that this needed tariffs and that kind, he should have come to Congress first and obtained authorization from them, that this is a fundamental violation of their prerogatives. But of course, they're so spineless and incompetent and stupid that they don't see how to do that. I mean, once upon a time in McKinley's day, that would never have happened. Now, can I just say, because I know an awful lot about protectionism in the United States in the 19th century. I mean, I remember I've studied this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are a few things to say about this. Of course, all of the tariff acts of the 19th century and early 20th century, going all the way up to Smoot-Hartley in 1930, were acts properly passed by Congress. Congress voted and legislated tariffs. Now, the political philosophy of that time, the arguments that were made were these are tariffs. They are not reciprocal tariffs. In fact, if you go to the arguments of the various proponents of tariffs at that time, they strongly opposed reciprocal tariffs. Henry Clay, who was a US senator, actually went into Senate and made a huge speech about this, saying reciprocal tariffs are a terrible idea. They are a complete violation of the whole doctrine and philosophy of what tariffs are all about. So did William McKinley, by the way, just saying. He also is totally opposed to reciprocal tariffs. And there's a famous statement published in 1903. I checked it out. A famous statement from the Protection League of America, who said that this is completely wrong. Reciprocal tariffs make absolutely no sense. We have a proper, pure system of protection grounded on the economic needs of the United States. Reciprocal tariffs, tariff wars, that kind of thing, that is not what we are about at all. So what Trump has done is completely different from what his hero McKinley used to do. He's not legislated for this through Congress, and he has gone for reciprocal tariffs, which McKinley hated.
And the other thing I find is that Trump seems like, even though the Congress now is controlled by a Republican, he hasn't worked much with the Congress. He bypassed them. He's running the country through executive orders and the True Social. Basically, that's how he run the country. Don't you think? I'm not sure
Absolutely.
that's the proper way to run the country.
No, it's not the proper way to run the country. It's not even the way that the founders of the Constitution ever intended. I mean, it is ridiculous. It reduces everything to one man and his small group of people who are running everything by themselves. I mean, it cannot work and it won't work. I mean, it reduces. It means that the government of the United States is reduced to a small court. You know, there's the king, and he has his little team of advisors, and he has some who are favorites and some who are not. That he listens one day to one of his favorites, who might be Navarro, and the next day he listens to another, who might be Musk, and they pull him in different directions. And the result is chaos, incoherence, and inconsistency. And at the core of it, you have an old man. People forget this. Trump is an old man with the biases and prejudices and attitudes that he's developed over a long life, which, of course, at his age, people find it very, very difficult indeed to change. It's absolutely the wrong way to conduct government.
And then one more aspect of that is that the people around him are making a huge amount of money out of this. So like David Sachs and then some other people around him, they clearly know that this executive order is coming, this big tariffs, and that will tank the stock market. So they were quietly short the stock market. And then his own Commerce Secretary, Lutnick, his
Mm.
company is long the bonds. Right, when the economy tanks, that the people run to buying the bonds and the treasury bonds, and that's so he longed those bonds. So you see, they personally, Commerce Secretary personally gain from a economy,
Yeah.
a recession, a tank,
Yeah.
crash the stock market, these sort of
Yeah.
thing. I mean, that's very Trump too, isn't it? Is this his way?
It
Kind
is
of
very Trump.
he
It is
he
very
he
Trump.
likes to reward loyalties this way, isn't it?
Yes, he does. I have to say that in this, he's no different. I mean, this is again
Mhm,
very difficult for people maybe in China to understand, but the line between private and public interests at the highest level of the United States has been eroded away. It was never particularly strong.
mhm.
Just to say this, I mean, it was never particularly strong, but it's been eroded away for a very, very long time now. And of course, today, I mean, it's completely disappeared as far as I can see.
So they all, I guess, once they got into office, they all rewarded their donors and their friends
Yeah.
and families one way or another.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. I mean, can I just say again, this is an aspect of Chinese society that I know quite a lot about because again, I'm interested in Chinese history and all of that. But I mean, you will find long periods of long lots of criticism of corruption that happen in China. I mean, there's a period in the 18th century when Tianlong had a minister called Ho Shen, for example,
Yeah.
who was very, very corrupt.
Yeah.
But of course people saw that
Yeah.
and were angry about it. I mean,
Mhm.
there was always this understanding in China that you didn't. It was wrong to do this. You find this again within the the in the Ming Dynasty with we call them eunuchs, the people who
Uh-huh.
were in the palace
Yeah.
who benefited. But all these Chinese officials often would be very courageous in pushing back and arguing against this. Um, there is no such tradition in the United States.
Mhm.
Briefly, in the early 20th century, when there was a movement called the Progressives,
Mhm.
they did try and argue against this. But American history basically has always allowed much more sort of overlap between private and even in Lincoln's time, this was
Mhm.
true.
I guess probably people just accept that. It seems like the society, the American society, pretty much accepted that the line between the private and the government kind of like very blurry. I guess that's has been accepted. Yeah.
Absolutely, because America is so focused on wealth.
Uh-huh.
This has been one of the major things on personal wealth,
Mhm.
and personal self-improvement. So the result is that it's very, very difficult in America, in the America of today, or in any America, any iteration of America, to say that if you work for the government, you should remain poor. I mean, it's just not
Uh-huh.
something that features at all in the American mindset. I mean, a society where an official rises to the highest level of government and dies a poor man,
Mhm.
which is hugely respected and admired in many societies,
Yep.
including in China,
Mhm.
is not one that America really has ever grasped.
How does Trump feel? I don't know. I mean, when you do that, when the inflation really goes up, it's fundamentally it's going to hurt the MAGA people. Lots of the MAGA people,
Yeah.
live on minimum wage, and as soon as the price goes up even a little bit, it will hurt them, right? Because they're very price
Yeah.
sensitive. So his friends, they are benefiting from this, but the people who put him in the office, the MAGA people, many of them will get hurt. Does he care about these people?
Yeah, I think he does. I think he does care about that. I think he actually genuinely, sincerely does care
Uh-huh.
about them.
I,
I
I
think
think so too.
we
Yeah.
got to understand Trump. I mean, this isn't a man who is malevolent towards his own base. I think he believes that what he's doing is absolutely done on their behalf. And
Mhm.
I think they believe the same. I mean, because
Okay.
he talks to them, and who else does? So there is this connection. And I think that there's quite a high probability that even as things begin to go very, very badly wrong, many of them will stick with him, at least for a while,
Mhm.
because they will say it's not really his fault. It's the fault of all these bad people around him or the people in China. They're
Mhm.
all working against this great president we have. It just, in fact, it would even to some extent confirm their belief that there is this vast conspiracy of people around the world who are out to bring down the United States and bring them down and that sort of thing. So this could turn very ugly, actually, because if that happens, they might start lashing out and they might start demanding that Trump does, which could create a spiral. We're already at the beginning of a spiral, which could make things an awful lot worse, just saying.
You think there's going to be a black market, smuggling things? Because
Oh,
right now,
yeah.
for example, Mexico, they are already smuggling like eggs, apparently, to the
Yes.
United States. So we're going to see
Well,
a huge market.
this is exactly where we're heading. I mean, we're not there properly
Mhm.
yet, and we got a long way to go. But if this process continues in the way that is being suggested that it will, we will start to. We will start to see price controls in the United States, for example. Um, um, I mean, that will go along with this because, um, again, if we go back to the late 19th, early 20th century, the United States at that time really did produce pretty much everything that it needed to produce. That isn't true anymore. There are major gaps and niches within the American market, which is going to be difficult to fulfill. So there will be attempts to circumvent this. So there will be black markets. There will be illegal trading. There will be bribery and corruption. And Trump will probably eventually, given the demand of his base, start trying to impose price controls.
Mhm.
I mean,
Mhm.
this is where it's heading to, and also capital controls. Just
Mhm.
saying, which will mean definitely the end of the dollar as a reserve currency.
You're talking about the reserve currency. Actually, China launched a 1.2 trillion digital yuan system,
Mm.
bypass the SWIFT. It's now connected to the 10 ASEAN countries and also 6 Middle East countries. That is 38% of the global trade volume. It's pretty
Yeah.
impressive in so short period of time, basically bypass the SWIFT, right?
Yeah.
So it's happening, and it's probably faster than we anticipated.
Yeah, absolutely. And I gather that the Russians are going to launch their digital ruble this summer. The
Uh-huh.
point, which is, I believe, by the way, uses a lot of Chinese technology. Just to
Hmm.
make that quite clear. So this is a joint enterprise. Remember, Xi Jinping is going to be in Moscow fairly soon.
Hmm.
But anyway, let's put all that aside. SWIFT is old technology. It represents the past. It is the past. The
Hmm.
future is digital currencies and all that comes with that. And you're absolutely correct. 38% of world trade is outside is within this system already. This already
Hmm.
existing system. The United States today, according to American figures, which I am sure overstate things, only accounts for 13% of
Hmm.
global demand. The reality is, I'm sure it's a lot less than that. But
Hmm.
if we were talking about 13% of global demand, 87% of global demand is outside the United States. This is very different from the world of the 1940s, for example, where the United States accounted for probably more than half of global demand.
Hmm.
Just saying.
Hmm. The TikTok ban, as you expected, as we talked about this, right?
Mm.
That so Trump, there is no deal. There, we know that there is no deal. But Trump give another 75 days extension. So clearly he wanted a deal. He wants a deal.
Yes.
But China is very clear that it's not for sale, right?
Yeah.
Why does he keep on? So what's the purpose of the 75 days? If there's no deal, there's no deal, right?
Yes. He does this all the time. He persistently believes, he persistently sells this story that the deal is round the corner. Again, it's very much based on his own experience as a deal maker in the world of New York real estate and all of
Mhm.
that. Um, I've just done whole programs about this. I was the first person to say this, that the way in which he's going about negotiating with the Russians is completely wrong. He doesn't understand how negotiations at a superpower level are conducted. And now there's articles in the Washington Post and others that are making exactly that point, that he doesn't understand and his team are not prepared for that level of negotiation. Well, what applies to Russia on issues like Ukraine and arms control and that sort of thing? Doubly, trebly, quadruply applies to negotiations with China on an issue like TikTok. The idea that you can just sort of bluff the Chinese into selling you TikTok at some kind of, knockdown price is ridiculous. Again, it shows a complete ignorance of China and of how these things are done. Now, first of all, the best thing to have done with TikTok was to leave it alone.
Yeah.
I mean, it was providing a good service to the American people. People liked it. There was no possible national security threat. The whole idea is ridiculous. It's
Mhm.
just an app
Yeah.
and a successful one. I mean, that was the first thing to say. The second is, if you are going to go down this completely mistaken path of trying to get the Chinese to divest from TikTok, well, then negotiate with them properly. Don't set ridiculous deadlines. Speak to the people in the relevant ministries in Beijing, the owners of TikTok in China. Try
Mhm.
to begin a proper negotiation. Accept that this will take time and that there's a lot of things that will happen, and pay the price. Um, go to pay a proper price. Seizing it, which is basically what they've done, and then trying to get the Chinese basically to cough up and accept that they're going to have to accept some sort of uh, um, you know low price or absurd price. It's basically a pirate raid
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
which the victim uh, um, um, you know signs off on the loss of his goods. Now that's not going to work with China. It might work in the world of real estate, where in New York, which is a pretty cutthroat and brutal business, but it doesn't work with a player like China.
Mhm. Well, he seems to put himself into a both the TikTok deal and the tariffs. It's now down to like a who blinked first kind of a
Yeah,
situation,
yeah,
which
yeah.
he created for himself now, isn't it?
Yes.
That
That's exactly correct. That is exactly correct. And that brings me back to my point. I mean, you don't bluff China because your bluff is going to be called. Sooner or later, he will blink. It's inevitable. You can see that. I mean, eh, tariffs on services from China now,
Mhm.
tariffs on American goods. American companies who've invested in China are now going to be in serious difficulty, but not because of any action that the Chinese took,
Mhm.
but because of what the United States itself has done. That's why people like Musk are so upset and
Mhm.
angry. Apple is going to be very, very upset by this
Mhm.
because, I mean, I remember Steve Jobs saying, he actually looked at localizing production in the United States. He decided to stick with China, not because Chinese wages were lower, but because China offered him services and products, subcomponents, which he
Mhm.
couldn't get in the United States. And I remember him talking about the glass, the special glass, for
Mhm.
example, that goes into iPhones.
Yeah.
He couldn't find anything analogous, any analogous producer in the United States. So what he's going to end up doing, if he works this all works through, is you're going to have cheap and bad, well, not cheap, you're going to have expensive badly put together iPhones made in the United States instead of cheaper, better, more reliable iPhones. That's where this is going. But as he hasn't understood this, he doesn't grasp what this is going to do. And of course, China will now withhold rare earths and those things because inevitably it must now, given that it's been treated as an adversary. You don't arm your adversary, essentially. So that's also going to have knock-on effects on the US. And saying that you can get these minerals in Ukraine doesn't have them. Saying that you're going to get these minerals in Russia, that's a farcical idea anyway. I don't think anybody in Russia really takes that seriously. But let's say that it happened. Let's say that the Russians provided you with the rare earths. There's plenty of rare earths in the United States.
Yeah.
It's the processing technology that you need. And building that up is a work of 10 years. Before you get to that point, you are not going to be able to provide adequate substitutes for what you've lost. Now, you will, because you will still be able to produce mobile phones, smartphones, but they won't be as good and as reliable as they once were. And people will notice the difference.
Yeah.
And they will be less reliable and less good and more technologically backward than those that China is making. So going back to what your point about black markets, you'll have a black market before very long in the United States for Chinese mobile phones because they'll be better than American ones.
That would be very unfortunate. You see, Trump doesn't seem to understand that the market is much complex than just the goods coming from China. Like, so for example, I have a pretty old car, that I'm driving. My family have been telling me that I need a new car, and I'm not going to buy a new car. But if there are some really nice Chinese EVs, I'm tempted. Okay, I am.
Yeah.
But let's say if I did ended up buying a Chinese EV, but then that also brings jobs to the United States. They are dealers, right? They are services. They are, there are all kinds of things. The same thing with phones. Yes, the phone coming from the China, but once people buy phones, they also buy apps. There's a phone-related businesses that are in the United States.
Exactly.
He totally ignore that, right? He doesn't thinking that way at all, seems like. Yeah.
Well, you see, he's focused on what he knows: steel, the steel plants and those sort of things. You see, you can actually, this is what's so sad about this. If you had a real program, a really proper, carefully worked out, systematically planned program to rebuild your steel industry, which would be, in my opinion, a good thing to do. You could do it. It would be, again, a 10-year plan, to say it simply. But it can be done, but this isn't the way.
No, yeah. He's very rough. He wants things happening now. And so, very.
Well, he is what we call in Britain an old man in a hurry.
Yeah. Okay. He also, regarding the negotiation with Russia, so what is going on there? At one point, he threatened Russia that he's going to have introduced, talking about tariffs, secondary tariffs, if there is no ceasefire, like next month or something. What he already said, I think already introduced the secondary tariffs for Venezuela oil or something. So that's another tariffs area that he's working on. Seems like. Not enough.
Yes, he's already. I mean, first of all, that was an absurd threat anyway. The Russians aren't going to pay any attention to something like that. They regard that as a bluff also. But he's already killed that whole idea because China now is becoming the major buyer of Russian oil, overtaking India. And he's already imposed these massive tariffs on China. So what is he going to do? I mean, he's going to impose even more tariffs on top of the tariffs that he's already put on. He doesn't want to do that because he wants, I think this is now becoming increasingly clear, he wants to deal with the Russians. He wants to deal with the Russians so that he can go into Russia, build up, buy their rare earths. As I said, he doesn't seem to understand that the processing is the thing that takes time, and that's the really, really important thing. But he wants all of that, and he wants that deal. But at the same time, he can't make the kind of concessions without which the deal won't be made. So the result is we have no actual negotiations underway. I think this is the thing to understand about this. If we're talking about Ukraine, there are no negotiations about ending the conflict in Ukraine. There was a brief talk about a ceasefire. That's all gone. I mean, nobody, as far as I can see, seriously believes there's a ceasefire going to happen. The Russian army has just gone on the offensive. They're at the beginning of what looks to me like a 9-month, 10-month offensive, and it's already gaining ground. And quite probably, by the time this offensive has ended, quite possibly, there will be no Ukraine left, just to say. I mean, things are moving on the battlefronts quite fast. But put all of that aside, there are no substantive discussions about Ukraine at the moment. There are some discussions going to happen in Istanbul in a few days about how to sort out the American embassy in Moscow and the Russian embassy in Washington, and that's a good thing. And that's it. That's about all we have at the moment. Because again, he didn't develop a realistic negotiating strategy. His idea of a deal is one in which the other side gives you what you want and you don't give back anything.
Yeah. And Netanyahu was in Washington. What was he there for the tariffs because they even imposed 70% on Israel, or something else? Did he achieve anything? I don't.
He achieved absolutely nothing as far as I can see. I think he was there primarily for the tariffs because apparently they've been a shock in Israel itself. I mean, the Israelis had absolutely not expected tariffs like that to be imposed on them, and they're stunned about it. So that's the first thing. But obviously, he's also there to talk about Iran. Now, again, it's very interesting about what's happened with Iran because Trump has threatened Iran. He's given Iran another one of his deadlines. This man loves deadlines, by the way. It's a 2-month deadline, and if they don't give up their nuclear weapons, which they haven't got, then they will be attacked in 2 months' time. Actually, there are things to talk about with the nuclear stockpile, the nuclear material stockpile, which Iran has built up as a response to American and Israeli threats. But never mind. Anyway, so he wants to negotiate with the Iranians. The Iranians say, look, we're not prepared to negotiate directly, but we are prepared to negotiate. So there's apparently a secret meeting, private meeting being arranged in Oman. It's not direct talks. Oman will be the intermediary. It's all supposed to be private, confidential. What does Trump do? He has to be the great deal maker again. He tells not just Netanyahu about it, which he should do, but he announces it to the whole world. So the Iranians are furious. But the Iranians also are hedging. And they've just had a big meeting, an important meeting, it's all over the Iranian media, with China and Russia, which are the countries that ultimately they're going to look to for long-term guarantees.
Well, yeah. I mean, if I were Iranian, I would hedging too, considering what happened in the past, right?
Exactly.
Now, what exactly Trump? Because last time there was a deal, and then Trump crushed that deal.
Yeah.
What changed to make him want to deal with the Iranian now?
Well, you tell me. It makes very little. It makes very little sense. I'm going to offer my own theory here. I think he does understand that wars in the Middle East at the time when he's trying to carry out these enormous changes in the United States itself, that more wars in the Middle East are not a good idea. I think he senses that a war against Iran would be an absolute disaster and would bring the United States into a critical position. And I think perhaps at some level he is aware that, contrary to much of the propaganda we've been hearing, Iran is much less isolated and in a much stronger position now than it was 2 or 3 years ago, or at least when he pulled out of the JCPOA, because Iran is now a member of the BRICS. It has a partnership treaty with Russia. It's going to start receiving Russian weapons supplies. It probably has to some extent already done so. It's on good terms with China. And I think he understands at some level that if there is going to be a war with Iran, not only is Iran in a stronger position to resist, but it has friends, whereas previously it had been much more isolated.
One more thing is how does Britain react? Britain didn't get only like 10% of the tariffs. What's the discussion there?
Well, I think it's important to understand that though the blanket tariff that was imposed on Britain was 10%, which is the one that people are talking about, individual products like automobiles are tariffed at 25%.
That's right.
Now, if you're talking about goods, because this is all about goods at the moment, Britain exports a very high proportion of the automobiles it makes, its cars, to the United States. I think 1 in 8 cars made in Britain are intended for the US market. And this is going to be very, very bad for those car makers. And we're talking about prestige marks like Land Rover, Jaguar Land Rover, Bentley, Rolls Royce. I mean, it's important to remember the British car industry is no longer a huge car industry in the way that it was, say, in the 1960s. But it's still important within the British industrial economy. Britain also exports engines, aircraft engines, to the United States. They're also going to be apparently affected by higher tariffs. Rolls-Royce, which is separate, by the way, from the car company. Rolls-Royce is Britain's leading engineering company. It makes actually very advanced jet engines. They also are going to be restricted in the American market. So we have problems in Britain, but we have a government that doesn't know what to do, because the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, outlined his responses to all of this. He went to one of the car factories. He said, we'll give you all the support you need. All he's able to do is to scale back a little deadlines on transferring completely to electric vehicles. He has no real plan, no real idea what to do, no real idea of how to position Britain to navigate through this, because this isn't something he expected or imagined would ever happen. And he's not a very imaginative politician. And our political system in Britain is broken. And anyway, and the political class beneath him lacks those managerial skills that would be needed, and which Britain used to have, that would be needed to take us through this. By the way, I got incredibly angry with Starmer a couple of days ago, and he wrote an article in the Daily Telegraph, which is a strange choice of newspaper for a Labour Prime Minister to choose to write an article for. But anyway, he wrote an article in which he said that it's the end of globalization. It's the moment when we need to rethink everything. This is going to play to our strengths, however: cool heads, pragmatism, and an overriding focus on British national interest. That's what he said. And in the next line, he started to talk about Ukraine, about British support for Ukraine. I mean, so cool heads, pragmatism, an overriding focus on British national interests. and then he immediately switches to Ukraine. He doesn't talk about economics, about industry, about
Mhm.
talking to Trump, about talking to China,
Mhm.
about coming up with some kind of industrial strategy or economic strategy, about um, doing changes to Britain. He talks about the one thing he thinks he understands, which is Ukraine.
Yeah. Okay. So what do we go from here? What's going to happen next? What's
Well,
Trump going to do, and what's the rest of the world is going to
right,
react?
right. Regardless of what happens, even if the United States walks this back,
Hmm.
what has been done has been done.
Hmm.
The economic world that we have known is gone.
Yeah. Okay.
What will happen is that increasingly the focus will transfer to China,
Hmm.
to the BRICS, to
Hmm.
the trading systems that China and the other BRICS nations are creating,
Hmm.
to the digital currencies that they're creating, to the new payment systems and payment vehicles. That day, which is coming anyway, has been brought forward and brought forward fast.
Hmm.
Um, in 5 years' time, certainly 10 years' time, but I predict sooner than that, 5 years' time, we will be seeing a completely different economic trade landscape, and China as the biggest industrial and manufacturing, and before long, and perhaps even already, high technology power will be at the center of it. That's what's going to happen.
Hmm. Okay.
It's
Okay.
going to achieve the opposite of what the United States, of what Trump believes.
Yeah. Yeah. It does seem like what he's doing now is the very counterproductive, for
Yes.
he has some good sense of what the problem,
Yeah.
the MAGA people suffering. I think, like you said, he has understanding, but his solution just totally counterproductive. Yeah.
Absolutely. He understands that the previous system was unsustainable,
Mm-hmm.
but and needed reform,
Yeah.
but he doesn't know how to do that reform. The
Mm-hmm.
trouble is no one else in the US does either. This is the crisis. The, we are actually now at the beginning of the American crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And can I just say also this? It's a product of American reversals and defeats. The fact that America's military ventures have been a failure, the
Oh.
fact that the war in Ukraine is ending in a defeat as well, the fact that China is now establishing itself as the leading scientific and technological power, the
Mm-hmm.
fact that the attempt by the United States to create a chips industry that would rival that of China has
Mm-hmm.
been a complete failure.
Yeah.
America is trying to respond to all of this, still committed to maintaining its primacy,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't know how to respond, because any rational response would understand that America has to give up its obsession with its primacy,
Mm-hmm.
which is its problem. I mean, there is no shame in going beyond a situation where the United States ceases to be number one economy. It becomes just a big economy among several. There's nothing wrong with that. The
Mm-hmm.
focus should be the best possible standard of living, material, cultural, whatever, for the American people.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
that
I
is
agree.
not what the political class in the United States seems able to understand.
And if you don't know how to reform, at least not to react too quickly, not to do things
Yeah.
rush, right? It seems like Trump doesn't really know what to do, but he seems like he need to do something. He feels urgent that he has to do something. So he started to broke things left and right, right? So that that seems very, very tragic in a way. That,
Well, absolutely. I mean, what the United States, properly speaking, needed to do was to conduct a major internal conversation with itself.
Mm-hmm.
Admit that things are going very badly wrong, that communities are in very bad situation, and try to work out a plan, a program to revisit the way the American economy works and to decide how to change it. China did that basically in the 1980s,
Mm-hmm.
but it's continued since then.
Mm-hmm.
Russia did that. I mean, Russia started to do that. I mean, believe it or not, they also tried to do it in the 1980s. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of good ideas went, but it all went horribly wrong because, well, we won't go into the details of why. Um, but they restarted that conversation with themselves in the late 1990s.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we see results as a result of this. America doesn't seem to be able to do this, partly because America is so divided with
Mm-hmm.
itself. There's
Yeah.
so much division in the
Mm-hmm.
United States now. But also, there is so much left from the past that America just cannot give up. This idea that it has to be at the forefront, that it must be number one, that it is the future, that America has defined itself as the future of what humanity should be. And when you impose that burden on yourself, it's very
Yeah.
difficult to look at what you are and to change.
Yeah. Okay. With that, let's continue next week. Um,
Indeed.
yeah, let's see what happens because a short period of time, lots of things can happen.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's. I mean, to be clear, if some of this is going to be walked back over the next
Yeah.
week, I would not be surprised. I don't expect that, by the way. I think that uh, uh, Trump's pride and that of some of the people around him is now heavily invested in this. But
Mm-hmm.
anything can change.
Yeah.
Anything can happen over the next few week or so.
Yeah. I
And
think,
I can say something else. There's lots of consultations going on. I mean, I know for a fact that lots of the economic ministries in Moscow have been in contact with their friends in China
okay.
over the last couple of days. It's not been much spoken about publicly, but I can tell you for an absolute fact that that's happening.
Yeah, I think Thursday or Friday when the stock market started, they actually went up a little bit because there were
Yeah,
rumors that Trump is going to delay for 90
yeah,
days or something, and then came back
yeah.
saying, no, 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 we are not going to delay it. So it
No,
seems like these kind of things, they don't just coming out of the thin air, right? So they must
no,
be something that Trump was thinking or somebody was
exactly,
telling Trump to do or something. Um,
exactly.
yeah, so we will see. Okay. All right. Talk to you next week then. Okay.
Absolutely. Have a great time. Thank you very
Okay.
much, Sophia. Have a great
Sure.
time.
You too. Bye.
You too.